professional separation between personal relationships and executive decisions. That was the line Olivia read first, standing under the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, 40 minutes before the board vote that would decide everything. Her name wasn't written anywhere on that page. It didn't need to be. Everyone in that building would know exactly who it meant.
You're separating me. In writing. To save the company.
The vote was minutes away. The board was already waiting, and for the first time since the elevator doors first opened between them, Olivia wasn't sure of the answer to the only question that mattered anymore. Would he choose her or the company his father built? Before we go any further, we owe you an apology. Part 2 took longer than it should have, longer than we promised, and longer than you deserve to wait after that ending. Life happens behind the scenes of every story, even the ones about elevators and stadiums and secrets that won't stay buried. So thank you for waiting. Thank you for the comments asking where we'd gone. We saw every single one of them, and this part exists because you refused to let Olivia and Jung-hoon's story fade into the scroll. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, go back now. You'll want to remember the kiss in the stadium, the elevator doors sealing shut on a secret, and the photographs that nearly ended everything before it began. Everyone else, take a breath. Get comfortable. This one hurts before it heals. 6 months of quiet dinners, 6 months of careful distance in public and careless honesty in private. 6 months of Olivia telling herself that the worst had already happened, that whatever storm had been coming for them had already broken and passed. She was wrong. It began, as these things often do, with something that looked like good news. Jung-hoon stood in his office on a gray Tuesday morning, staring at a merger proposal that had landed on his desk without warning. Tae-hyun read over his shoulder, his usual easy humor draining out of his face line by line. "This isn't a merger," Tae-hyun said slowly. "This is a hostile acquisition wearing a nice suit. I know what it is. Do you know who's behind it?" Jung-hoon turned the page, and his jaw tightened in a way Tae-hyun had only seen once before, the week after his father's funeral, when the board had first tried to test how much a grieving 19-year-old could be pushed before he pushed back. "Director Song," Jung-hoon said quietly, "the same family Lee Hyun-suk tried to marry me into." "They're not trying to marry you anymore," Tae-hyun said. "They're trying to own you." The proposal was elegant in its cruelty. Director Song's conglomerate had spent the past 6 months quietly buying up minority shares through 3 different holding companies, none of them traceable back to the family name until the final signature. They now controlled just under 22% of the company Jung-hoon's father had built from nothing. Not enough to seize control outright. Enough to demand a seat at every table that mattered, and enough to make the next board vote a knife fight instead of a formality. "There's a clause," Tae-hyun said, tapping the 3rd page, "buried in the fine print. If the board votes to formalize the partnership, they get input on executive conduct. Personal conduct, Jung-hoon, that's not corporate language. That's a threat with a briefcase." Jung-hoon didn't answer right away. He was thinking of Olivia, 3 floors below him, unaware that a family she had never met had just found a new way to reach for the thing they'd failed to take from her once already. He picked up his phone and called Han Ji-soo. "I want every clause of this proposal reviewed by the end of the day," he said. "And I want to know exactly how much leverage Director Song actually has versus how much he's bluffing." "And if it isn't a bluff?" Han Ji-soo asked. Jung-hoon looked out the window at the skyline his father had left him, and for the first time in months, felt the old, familiar weight of a life that had never fully belonged to him settle back onto his shoulders. "Then we find out what I'm actually willing to lose," he said, "and what I'm not." Olivia found out about the acquisition the way she found out about most things that mattered, sideways, through a conversation she wasn't meant to overhear. She was walking past the executive conference room with a folder of quarterly outreach numbers when she heard Park Do-hyun's voice, tight with an urgency she'd never heard from him before. 22% and climbing. If they push for a formal partnership vote, we're looking at real influence over executive decisions. All of them. "He won't let that happen," someone said. "He might not have a choice." Olivia stood very still in the hallway, the folder pressed against her chest like it could shield her from what she was hearing. She didn't understand every detail. She understood enough. She understood the word influence. She understood the word executive. And some old, familiar instinct, the one that had kept her alive through years of watching her family's finances teeter on a blade's edge, told her that whatever was happening in that room had something to do with her, even if no one in it had said her name yet. She found Jung-hoon that evening in his office, the city lights spread out behind him, like something out of a painting. Neither of them had time to admire anymore. "Tell me the truth," she said, closing the door behind her. "Not the version you think will keep me calm. The real one." He studied her for a long moment, and she watched him decide, in real time, to stop protecting her from something she was clearly already carrying. "Director Song's family has been quietly buying shares in this company for months," he said. "They now control enough to demand a seat at the table. If the board votes to formalize a partnership with them, they gain influence over executive conduct. Meaning me. Meaning us." Olivia sat down slowly across from him, the folder still clutched in her lap like an anchor. "This is because of the marriage alliance that fell apart. Because of Lee Hyun-suk. Partly." Jung-hoon's voice was steady, but something underneath it had gone quiet and careful, the way it always did when he was choosing his words around a wound instead of through it. "Director Song lost a business arrangement he'd spent years building. Men like him don't lose gracefully. They find another door. And I'm standing in front of it. You're standing beside me," he corrected. "There's a difference, and I intend to make sure the board understands it." Jung-hoon, her voice cracked slightly on his name, and she hated how quickly it happened, how little control she had over the fear rising in her chest. "If this costs you the company." "It won't." "You don't know that." "No," he admitted, "I don't. But I know what it costs me if I let them dictate who I'm allowed to care about in exchange for keeping it." He reached across the desk and took her hand, his thumb tracing slow, absent circles over her knuckles, a gesture she suspected he didn't even realize he was making. "My father built this company so that no one would ever again tell a Sulo what he was permitted to want. I'm not undoing that for a percentage point." She wanted, desperately, to believe him, but some old, exhausted part of her, the part that had grown up watching good intentions get crushed under bad math, couldn't quite let go of the fear that this time, wanting something wasn't going to be enough to keep it. The board vote was scheduled for the following Friday, and the week that led up to it stretched long and taut, like a rope pulled from both ends by people who had stopped caring whether it held. Na Hae-rin, who had spent the last 6 months keeping her ambitions carefully banked, found new oxygen in the chaos. She began appearing near Director Song's representatives in the hallway with increasing, deliberate frequency, offering small courtesies that cost her nothing and bought her, she hoped, a great deal. You seem very comfortable around them, Choi Eun-ji observed one afternoon, catching Na Hae-rin near the elevator bank, mid-conversation with one of Director Song's aides. I'm simply being professional, Na Hae-rin said smoothly. Unlike some people in this building, I understand the importance of staying useful to whoever ends up holding the power. And if Mr. Seo keeps the power? Na Hae-rin's smile didn't waver. Then I was simply being polite to a guest. There's no crime in that. Eun-ji watched her walk away and felt, for the first time in a long while, a genuine chill settle over the back of her neck. Meanwhile, Rachel Morgan, the journalist whose earlier investigation had helped bring down Lee Hyun-suk, found her way back into the story almost by accident. A separate source, unconnected to the company entirely, mentioned during an unrelated interview that Director Song's holding companies had a history of using acquisitions to quietly pressure executives out of relationships that didn't serve the family's political ambitions. Rachel sat with that detail for a long time before she picked up the phone. I need everything you have, she told her source, on every executive who's ever worked for a company Director Song's family has taken a stake in. I want to know how many of them are still married to the people they were married to before the ink dried. The answer, when it came back 3 days later, was almost none. Olivia hadn't told Amina the full weight of what was happening, mostly because she wasn't sure she understood the full weight of it herself. But Amina, who had spent years learning to read the exact texture of Olivia's silences, didn't need the details to know something had shifted. You've barely touched your food in 4 days, Amina said one evening, sliding a plate closer to her on the kitchen table. And you keep checking your phone like it's going to explode. It might, Olivia admitted. There's a vote on Friday. If it goes the wrong way, I don't know what will happen to him, or to us. And if it goes the right way, then I still don't know what happens to us, Olivia said, and the honesty of it startled her as much as it seemed to startle Amina. Amina, I keep thinking about my mother, about how hard she worked just to keep us fed after Dad died, and how I promised myself I'd never let anyone else's storm become the reason my family went hungry again. This isn't the same thing, isn't it? Olivia's voice thinned. If this vote goes badly, and the board decides his personal life is a liability, what happens to my job? What happens to the initiative, to the kids in 3 cities who are finally getting equipment because someone believed in doing this right? Do I lose all of that because I let myself fall for a man I met by accident in a crowd of 80,000 strangers? Amina reached across the table and gripped her hand, hard enough that Olivia had to look up. You didn't fall for him by accident, Amina said. You fell for him because he's the first person who ever looked at you and saw everything you carry and decided to help you carry it instead of asking you to hide it. That's not a mistake, Olivia. That's the first time in your entire life someone's actually met you halfway. Olivia didn't answer. She only stared at the tea cooling in front of her, thinking of her father's hands again, rough and steady, and the promise she'd made at his graveside, the one that had somehow, impossibly, expanded to include a man she'd never expected to need. Thursday night, the night before the vote, Jung-hoon called an emergency session with Han Ji-soo, Park Do-hyun, and Tae-hyun in his office. The 4 of them gathered around a table covered in shareholder documents and projected voting percentages. We have 48% secured, Han Ji-soo said. Director Song's coalition has 39. The remaining 13% is split between 4 independent shareholders who haven't declared a position. Can we reach them before tomorrow? Jung-hoon asked. We've tried. 3 of them won't take our calls. And the 4th? Han Ji-soo hesitated. just slightly. The fourth is willing to meet, tonight, but she has conditions. What conditions? She wants assurance, in writing, that Ms. Olivia's position within the company remains entirely separate from any personal relationship with you. She's concerned about optics, about whether investing in this company means investing in a founder whose judgment might be, her words, compromised by sentiment. The room went quiet. Park Do-hyun cleared his throat carefully. It's a reasonable ask, on paper. It's an insult wearing a business suit, Tae-hyun snapped. They're asking him to prove his relationship doesn't matter in order to save the company that lets him have one. Jung-hoon sat very still, his hands folded on the table, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Draft the assurance, he said finally. Jung-hoon, Tae-hyun started. Draft it, Jung-hoon repeated, quieter now. Professional separation between personal relationships and executive decisions. That's not a lie. I've never once let what I feel for her influence a business decision, and I never will. If that's what secures the 13%, then it costs me nothing but pride, and pride was never going to keep this company standing. But something in his voice, when he said it, sounded less like conviction and more like a man talking himself into a decision he wasn't entirely sure he could live with. He didn't tell Olivia about the assurance, not that night, not the next morning, telling himself there would be time after the vote, once the danger had passed and the words could be explained in context instead of delivered as a raw, frightening fact. He was wrong about that too. Na Hye-rin, who had spent the week cultivating exactly the kind of proximity that let information travel through unlocked doors, overheard enough of the drafting conversation to understand its shape, if not its full nuance. And where Lee Hyun-suk had once used photographs as a weapon, Na Hye-rin discovered she needed nothing so dramatic. She simply mentioned it to Olivia, carefully, gently, with the practiced compassion of someone delivering devastating news while looking deeply sorry to be the one holding it. I only think you deserve to know, Na Hye-rin said, catching Olivia near the break room Friday morning, 2 hours before the vote. He's drafting a formal statement, something about keeping your relationship entirely separate from company decisions, in writing, for the shareholders. Olivia felt something cold slide down through her chest. That's not what it sounds like, she said, though she wasn't sure yet if she believed it. Maybe not, Na Hye-rin said, with the gentlest possible cruelty. But it does sound like a man who's about to sign something that says you don't matter to how he runs this company. I just thought, given everything you've already sacrificed to be here, you'd want to hear it from someone before you read it in a memo. She walked away before Olivia could respond, leaving her standing alone in the hallway with the particular kind of silence that arrives right before something breaks. If you're still with us, and we suspect you are, because you've made it this far without looking away, this is where we ask you for something small in return. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us whether you think Olivia should confront him before the vote or after, and subscribe if this story has earned even a sliver of your evening. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes of this story is the reason we couldn't stop writing it, even when life got in the way. Now, back to the boardroom. Olivia found Jung-hoon 40 minutes before the vote, standing near the executive elevator with a single folded document in his hand, the same elevator where they'd first stood in silence, months ago, neither of them yet aware of everything that silence would eventually cost. Is it true? She asked, her voice tighter than she wanted it to be. Are you signing something that says, I don't matter to how you run this company? Jung-hoon's expression shifted, surprise giving way immediately to something closer to dread. "Who told you that? Does it matter who told me? Is it true?" He didn't answer right away, and in the space where his silence should have been reassurance, Olivia felt something inside her chest quietly, irreversibly crack. "It isn't what it sounds like," he said finally. "That's what everyone says right before it turns out to be exactly what it sounds like." "Olivia, show me the document." He hesitated, and that hesitation, brief, almost imperceptible, the kind of pause a stranger might not have noticed at all, was the thing that undid her more completely than any single sentence could have. She reached out and took the folded paper from his hand before he could stop her, and read it there, in the hallway, under the harsh fluorescent light, her eyes moving faster than her breath could keep pace with. Professional separation between personal relationships and executive decisions. Assurance that all future board decisions will be made independent of any personal attachments currently held by the founder. "You're separating me," she said quietly, in writing, "to save the company. I'm protecting the company so that I still have something worth building a life in, with you, once this is over," Jung-hoon said, his voice low and urgent now, the practiced calm finally slipping. "Olivia, this document changes nothing about how I feel. It's language for shareholders who don't understand the difference between sentiment and judgment. It doesn't touch us. It says my name doesn't belong anywhere near your decisions," Olivia said. "It says that, to keep this company, you have to promise a room full of strangers that I don't count. That isn't. I have spent my entire life being the thing someone else had to explain away," she said, and now her voice was shaking in earnest. 6 months and a lifetime of careful control finally giving way all at once. "I watched my mother explain medical bills. I watched my brother explain scholarship gaps. I have spent every single day since I met you terrified that eventually someone would ask you to explain me away too, and I told myself you never would. And now you're standing here holding the paper that proves I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," Jung-hoon said, reaching for her hand. "Olivia, please." She stepped back before he could reach her, and the small, deliberate distance between them felt, in that moment, wider than anything either of them had ever crossed to get to each other in the first place. "I need to think," she said, "alone. Before the vote happens and I say something I can't take back in front of a board that's already decided I'm a liability." "Olivia, go win your vote, Jung-hoon," she said, and the use of his name, without the softness that usually carried it, landed harder than any accusation could have. "I hope it's worth what it's costing." She walked away, and this time, when the elevator doors closed between them, neither of them reached out to stop it. The board meeting convened at exactly 2 o'clock, and Jung-hoon sat at the head of the table with a composure that cost him everything he had left to give it. Director Song's representative, a sharp, unhurried man named Choi Baek-ho, opened with the practiced smoothness of someone who had done this exact maneuver in a dozen boardrooms before this one. "We appreciate the assurance Mr. Seo has provided," he said, sliding the signed document toward the center of the table. "It addresses our concerns regarding the separation of personal matters from executive judgment. Then we can proceed to the vote," Han Ji-soo said. "One moment," Choi Baek-ho said, raising a hand. "There is an additional matter Director Song wishes to raise, given the sensitivity of recent events." Jung-hoon felt something in his chest tighten. "Go on." "It has come to our attention," Choi Baek-ho said carefully, "that the personal relationship in question may not, in fact, be as separate from company matters as this document suggests. Specifically, regarding the Youth Outreach Initiative currently receiving significant company funding, an initiative personally overseen by the individual named in this very assurance. The room went very still. You're suggesting Ms. Olivia's initiative was funded because of a personal relationship rather than on its merits, Park Do-hyun said, his voice tight with the effort of staying composed. I'm suggesting, Choi Baek-ho said mildly, that a thorough shareholder review might wish to examine the timeline more closely. The initiative received full funding within days of a highly publicized elevator encounter. Draw your own conclusions. Jung-hoon rose from his chair before he'd fully decided to. The initiative was approved because Park Do-hyun himself brought it to this board with visible enthusiasm, calling it the most thoughtful proposal marketing had produced in 2 years, Jung-hoon said, his voice sharpening with a fury he rarely allowed the room to see. I did not write a single line of that proposal. I did not draft a single figure in that budget. I approved it because it was good work, done by someone who has never once asked this company for anything she hadn't already earned 3 times over. And yet, Choi Baek-ho said, unbothered, the optics remain difficult to ignore. Then let's remove the optics entirely, Jung-hoon said. I'll recuse myself from any further oversight of the initiative. Full authority transfers to Park Do-hyun and the Finance Committee, effective immediately. If the work is as strong as this board has already agreed it is, it will survive scrutiny without needing my name attached to it at all. A murmur moved through the room, the particular murmur of executives recalibrating in real time. Choi Baek-ho studied him for a long moment, clearly having expected resistance rather than immediate concession. That's a reasonable adjustment. It's the only adjustment I'm willing to make, Jung-hoon said. The vote proceeds as scheduled, and Director Song's coalition will find that I don't need to hide the people I care about in order to run this company honestly. I only need this board to stop mistaking honesty for weakness. The vote, when it finally came, landed 51% in Jung-hoon's favor, narrow, exhausting, but decisive. Director Song's coalition would keep its seats, its influence, its uncomfortable proximity. But the acquisition, the true threat, had failed to take hold. Jung-hoon should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the empty space beside him where, 6 months ago, he might have turned to share the news with someone who would have understood exactly what it cost him to win. Olivia spent the afternoon of the vote sitting in the Youth Initiative's field office, staring at a stack of equipment orders she couldn't focus on, her phone silent on the desk beside her. Choi Eun-ji found her there just after 5 o'clock, her expression unusually grave. The vote passed, Eun-ji said. He kept the company. Good, Olivia said, and meant it, even though the ache was still sitting heavy in her chest. That's good. He recused himself from your initiative, Eun-ji added. Full authority transferred to Park Do-hyun. He did it in the middle of the vote, in front of Director Song's people, to prove the funding had nothing to do with you and him. Olivia looked up sharply. He gave up oversight? Of something he approved himself? He gave up the one thing Director Song's coalition was using to suggest your work wasn't earned, Eun-ji said quietly. He didn't do it to distance himself from you, Olivia. He did it so no one could ever again use your name as a weapon against either of you. Olivia sat with that for a long moment, feeling the shape of the morning's fear shift slightly beneath the new information, though it didn't dissolve entirely. He signed a document saying I don't factor into his decisions, she said. That's not nothing, Eun-ji. That's the exact fear I've carried my whole life, written down and handed to a room full of strangers. Or, Yoon-ji said gently, it's a man who understood that the only way to protect what mattered to him was to prove, in the loudest way this board would understand, that he didn't need you attached to his authority in order to still choose you completely. Olivia didn't answer. She only stared out the window at the field beyond it, where a handful of children were still running drills in the fading light, blissfully unaware of everything their new cleats and freshly resodded grass had almost cost the people who'd fought to give it to them. Jung-hoon found her there an hour later, standing at the edge of the field in the half-dark, the same way he'd found her once before, in a conference room during a storm that had changed both their lives. I won the vote, he said quietly, standing a careful distance behind her. I heard. I also gave up oversight of your initiative, publicly, in front of the people trying to use it against you. I heard that too. She turned to face him finally, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. Why didn't you tell me before I read that document in the hallway like a stranger? Because I was afraid, he admitted, and the honesty of it seemed to cost him something physical, some old, guarded part of himself finally giving way. I've spent my entire life being told that showing what I actually feel is a liability, that the moment I let anyone see how much something matters to me, someone finds a way to use it against me. I thought if I handled it quietly, alone, I could protect you from ever having to feel like a bargaining chip in my own boardroom. Instead, I found out from Na-hae-rin, Olivia said, in a hallway, like gossip. I know. His voice dropped lower, rougher, and I am more sorry for that than I know how to say correctly. You are not a bargaining chip, Olivia. You have never been a bargaining chip. You are the first thing in this entire company that I have ever fought for without calculating the cost first, and I handled it so badly that you felt like the cost itself instead. Olivia felt something in her chest, finally, carefully, begin to unclench. I grew up watching people I loved get explained away by other people's convenience, she said quietly. I promised myself a long time ago that I would never let that happen to me. When I read that document, it felt like it was happening anyway, no matter how careful I'd been. It won't happen again, Jung-hoon said, not because I'm promising you empty words, but because I just spent an entire boardroom proving that I'd rather lose control of something I built with my own hands than let this company treat you as a liability for one more day. She closed the distance between them slowly, and when she finally let him hold her, it wasn't relief she felt first. It was the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being fought for out loud, in a language everyone in that boardroom would understand, instead of quietly, in the dark, where no one else could ever be made to answer for it. I'm still scared, she admitted against his shoulder. So am I, he said, but I'd rather be scared with you in the daylight than safe without you in the dark. I learned that today, watching an entire room decide whether you were worth the risk. It wasn't a difficult decision. 3 days later, Rachel Morgan published her findings. The article didn't focus on Olivia or on Jung-hoon or on the vote that had nearly cost him control of his own company. It focused, with careful, deliberate precision, on a pattern spanning 6 different corporations, each one absorbed in part by Director Song's family holdings, each one followed within a year by the quiet, engineered dissolution of an executive's personal relationship that had, in Director Song's judgment, threatened the family's influence. A pattern of control disguised as concern for optics, the article read. A family that has learned, across a decade of careful acquisitions, that owning a piece of a company means owning a say in who its leaders are allowed to love. The article did not name Olivia directly. It didn't need to. Everyone who read it understood exactly which recent boardroom vote had inspired it, and exactly which founder had, for the first time in the pattern's history, refused to let the arrangement stand. Director Song's coalition, facing a public relations disaster neither Choi Baek-ho nor anyone else had anticipated, quietly withdrew its remaining influence over the following month, selling its shares back at a modest loss simply to remove the family name from a story that was rapidly becoming a referendum on corporate control over private lives. Lee Hyun-suk, watching the news from the same dim office he hadn't yet vacated, read the article twice, then set his phone down and allowed himself, for the first time in months, something close to a genuine laugh. "It seems," he murmured to no one, "the universe has a longer memory than most people give it credit for." Olivia's promotion to Senior Director of Community Initiatives came through 2 weeks later, carrying with it full authority over the program she'd built from a stack of quarterly reports and 2 weeks of sleepless nights. Park Do-hyun delivered the news personally, shaking her hand with the particular warmth of someone who had watched her earn every inch of it twice over. "For what it's worth," he told her, "the board's vote to approve this had nothing to do with anyone's personal life. It had everything to do with 3 cities' worth of children who now have equipment, transportation, and coaches who show up. That was always going to speak louder than any rumor." That evening, Jung-hoon took her back to the same stadium, the same section, though this time the match had ended hours earlier, and the stands sat empty beneath a sky just beginning to darken. "Why here?" Olivia asked, watching him lead her toward the exact row where they'd first collided, months and a lifetime ago. "Because everything that mattered started here," he said, "and because I owe this place an apology for how long it took me to understand what it was actually offering me." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box, and Olivia felt her breath catch somewhere between her chest and her throat, in almost the exact place it had caught the first time she'd seen him standing in that elevator. "I am not going to pretend this will be simple," he said, his voice steady, despite the tremor she could see in his hands. "There will be more Director Songs, more Lee Hyun-soks, more rooms full of people who think they have the right to decide who I'm allowed to love, and more mornings where you'll have to fight to be believed on your own merits, in a world that keeps trying to hand you someone else's explanation instead. But I would rather spend the rest of my life fighting that fight beside you, in the daylight, in front of every board this company will ever convene, than spend one more year winning quietly and alone." Olivia's hands were shaking when she covered her mouth. 80,000 empty seats, rising silently around them, like witnesses who had already decided, long before she had, exactly how this story was supposed to end. "Olivia," Jung-hoon said, kneeling in the same aisle where a stranger's laugh had once cracked something open in his chest that grief had kept sealed for years. "Marry me, not because it solves a boardroom problem, and not because any family needs it to secure an alliance. Marry me because you are the first thing I have ever wanted, for reasons that have nothing to do with what it costs me, and everything to do with who I become when I'm standing next to you." Somewhere near the top of the stairs, unnoticed by either of them, an old stadium steward paused mid-round, watching the 2 figures below with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent 40 years believing that some meetings were never really accidents at all. Olivia said yes before he'd even finished rising to his feet, and the sound of it echoed, soft and certain, through 80,000 empty seats that had once held the entire noisy, chaotic beginning of everything they now finally, fully belonged to. If this story found its way into your evening tonight, and you felt even a fraction of what Olivia felt standing in that empty stadium, don't let this be the last time you hear from them. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and tell us in the comments what you think comes next for Olivia and Jung-hoon. Because a wedding, a family, and one more reckoning with everyone who ever tried to tear them apart are still waiting to be told. Thank you again for your patience while we brought you here. We promise the wait for what comes next won't be nearly as long.